Let's take you to the UN Security Council now.
بند 2 من جدول الأعمال. أعطي الكلمة الآن للسيدة روزماري دي كارلو.
Madam President, the war in Ukraine is now in its third week. Fighting continues unabated. The Russian armed forces are pursuing their offensive operations and laying siege to several cities in the south, east, and north of the country. A large concentration of Russian forces is reportedly massed along several approaches to the capital, Kyiv. The situation is particularly alarming in Mariupol, Kharkiv, Sumy, and Chernihiv, where there is shelling of residential areas and civilian infrastructure, resulting in an increasing number of civilians killed and injured. The utter devastation being visited on these cities is horrific. The numbers bear out the conclusion that civilians are paying the highest price for the conflict. As of 11 March, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has recorded a total of 1,546 civilian casualties, including 564 killed and 982 injured since the start of the invasion on 24 February. OHCHR believes the real casualty figures are likely considerably higher, as information from locations whose intense hostilities are ongoing has been delayed and reports are still pending corroboration. Most of the recorded civilian casualties, which include children, have been caused by explosive weapons with a wide impact area, including heavy artillery and multi-launch rocket systems and missile and airstrikes. OHCHR has received credible reports of Russian forces using cluster munitions, including in populated areas. Indiscriminate attacks, including those using cluster munitions, which are of a nature to strike military objectives and civilians or civilian objects without distinction, are prohibited under international humanitarian law. Direct attacks against civilians and civilian objects, as well as so-called area bombardment in towns and villages, are also prohibited under international law and may amount to war crimes. As of 10 March, the World Health Organization has verified 26 attacks on health facilities, health workers, and ambulances, causing 12 deaths and 34 injuries. This includes the bombing of the Mariupol Maternity Hospital on 9 March. We condemn such attacks without reservation. They cause not only death and destruction, they also deprive people of urgently needed care and endanger more lives. We cannot emphasize it enough. The targeting of civilians, of residential buildings, hospitals, schools, kindergartens is inexcusable and intolerable. All alleged violations of international human law must be investigated and those found responsible held accountable. Madam President, millions of people in Ukraine need urgent assistance. This includes 2 million internally displaced people. We are scaling up humanitarian aid in areas where security permits. More than 500,000 people are now receiving assistance, including life-saving food, shelter, blankets, and medical supplies. The United Nations and our partners have developed operational plans to meet humanitarian needs where they are most acute. This work needs funding. Over $1.5 billion was pledged to the appeals last week. We are grateful for this generosity and encourage donors to release the funding quickly. Madam President, it is critical to urgently achieve a cessation of hostilities, to allow for the safe passage of civilians from besieged areas, and to ensure that life-saving humanitarian supplies can reach those who remain. On 9 March, over 51,000 people were reportedly evacuated through 5 out of 6 agreed-upon safe passages. These safe passages must continue. They should be implemented with clear principles and modalities. Civilians should be duly and timely informed of the possibility to leave the concerned areas and on a voluntary basis and in the direction they choose. To expand life-saving assistance and services to those most in need, humanitarian actors must also have safe, rapid, unimpeded, and sustained access to all areas. We commend the humanitarian actors on the ground who are staying and delivering in a highly volatile situation. Madam President, the number of refugees from Ukraine has reached 2.5 million people. These numbers continue increasing by the day. We also commend the countries that have kept their borders open to welcome and support refugees. All people fleeing Ukraine, including third country nationals, need access to safety and protection in line with the principle of non-refoulement and without any form of discrimination. Madam President, the need for negotiations to stop the war in Ukraine could not be more urgent. We note the 3 rounds of talks held thus far between Ukrainian and Russian delegations. We call for such efforts to intensify, including to further secure humanitarian and ceasefire arrangements as a matter of priority. We urge the sides to build on their contacts, such as the meeting yesterday between the foreign ministers of Ukraine and the Russian Federation in Antalya, Turkey. The logic of dialogue and diplomacy must prevail over the logic of war. The Secretary General is grateful to the many member states working in pursuit of a diplomatic solution to this dangerous conflict. He is in regular contact with regional and other leaders, and his good offices remain available. Madam President, let me affirm the U.S. commitment to Ukraine's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. As the war grinds on, there's already much reflection about its implications beyond the tragedy it represents for Ukraine. We increasingly hear the use of terms such as turning point, defining moment, end of multilateralism. I believe this is not an exaggeration. Indeed, some consequences are already being felt economically and politically. Perhaps most alarming are the risks the violence poses to the global framework for peace and security. We must do everything we can to find a solution and put an end to this war. And we must do it now. Thank you, Madam President.
أشكر السيدة دي كارلو على إحاطتها. أعطي الكلمة الآن للسيدة إيزومي ناكاميتسو.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, distinguished members of the Security Council, I thank Council members for the opportunity to brief you this morning. I am aware of reports that certain public health facilities are in areas impacted by armed conflict, putting the safety of those facilities at risk. I appeal to all parties in this conflict to ensure the safety of all such facilities in Ukraine. I am aware of media reports regarding allegations of biological weapons programs. The United Nations is not aware of any biological weapons programs. That is largely thanks to the 1972 Biological Weapons Convention, which prohibits the development, production, acquisition, transfer, stockpiling, and use of biological and toxic weapons. The Russian Federation and Ukraine are both states parties to the convention. In addition, the Russian Federation is a depository government under the convention. All states parties to the convention have undertaken never in any circumstances to develop, produce, stockpile, or otherwise acquire or retain biological weapons. Biological weapons have been outlawed since the BWC entered into force in 1975. A total of 183 states have now joined the convention, and biological weapons are universally seen as being abhorrent and illegitimate. The BWC lacks a multilateral verification mechanism overseen by an independent organization such as the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. Therefore, assessing compliance with its obligations is a task for its states parties. Madam President, despite the lack of an international verification regime, the Biological Weapons Convention does, however, contain several measures to which concerned states parties can have recourse in order to address situations in which states parties have concerns or suspicions about the activities of their peers. For example, Article 5 of the Convention states that, and I quote, "The states parties to this convention undertake to consult one another and to cooperate in solving any problems which may arise in relation to the objective of or in the application of the provisions of this convention." End of quote. Within the framework of Article 5, states parties have established an annual exchange of information based upon the submission of confidence-building measures. States parties must declare information about relevant facilities and activities on their territory in order to prevent or reduce the occurrence of ambiguous doubts and suspicions between them. The Russian Federation and Ukraine both participate annually in the confidence-building measures. The annual reports submitted by the Russian Federation and Ukraine are available to all BWC states parties for the purposes of transparency and reassurance. In addition, and also within the framework of Article 5 of the Convention, states parties have developed procedures for clarifying ambiguous and unresolved matters, including the possible convening of a formal consultative meeting to consider such matters. Article 6 of the Convention states that, and I quote, "Any state party to this convention which finds that any other state party is acting in breach of obligations deriving from the provisions of the convention may lodge a complaint with the Security Council. If agreed by the Security Council, an investigation on the basis of the complaint received could be initiated. Article 6 of the Convention has never been activated." While these provisions have not been regularly used, they are nonetheless internationally agreed procedures that are available to be used to diffuse tensions and to address and resolve any concerns relating to compliance with obligations under the BWC in a multilateral setting. I would therefore encourage BWC states parties to consider making use of the available procedures for consultation and cooperation in order to resolve these issues. Madam President, distinguished members of the Security Council, situations such as this demonstrate the need to strengthen the BWC, to operationalize it, and to institutionalize it. I would therefore like to take this opportunity to encourage its states parties to come to the Convention's 9th Review Conference, scheduled to take place in Geneva later in 2022, committed to a series of overhaul of the Convention to ensure it is properly equipped and resourced to deal with the challenges ahead. Madam President, distinguished members of the Security Council, to conclude my statement, I would like to take this opportunity to address the worrying issue of the safety and security of nuclear power plants in Ukraine. An accident involving the nuclear facilities in Ukraine could have severe consequences for public health and environment, and all steps must be taken to avoid it. The possibility of an accident caused by failure to a reactor's power supply or the inability to provide regular maintenance is growing by the day. The forces in effective control of nuclear power plants in Ukraine must ensure their safe and secure operation. I am extremely concerned that 4 of the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA's, 7 pillars of the safe and secure operations of facilities are reportedly not being implemented at Chernobyl and Zaporizhzhia. Communications must be fully restored, and operating staff must be allowed to properly carry out their duties and to do so free of undue pressure. I would like to echo the Secretary General's support for IAEA Director General Grossi's efforts to develop a framework to ensure the safety and security of Ukraine's facilities, and welcome the constructive meetings he held in Turkey on 10th of March with the foreign ministers of Ukraine and the Russian Federation. I thank you very much for your attention.
أشكر السيدة ناكاميتسو على إحاطتها. أعطي الكلمة الآن لأعضاء المجلس الراغبين في الإدلاء ببيانات. أعطي الكلمة لممثل الاتحاد الروسي.
Госпожа председатель, уважаемые коллеги, пандемия коронавируса COVID-19 показала, насколько уязвимо человечество перед лицом биологических угроз. Она уже унесла и продолжает уносить колоссальное количество человеческих жизней. С вступлением в силу в 1975 году Конвенции о запрете биологического и токсинного оружия появилась надежда, что миру удалось избавиться, по крайней мере, от тех биологических угроз, которые созданы руками людей, так как все подписавшие ее страны осознают чудовищные риски, которые несет в себе использование биологического оружия, и отказались от планов по его разработке. К сожалению, у нас есть основания полагать, что эти надежды не сбылись в полной мере. Мы созвали сегодняшнее заседание, поскольку в ходе проведения России специальной военной операции на Украине вскрылись поистине шокирующие факты экстренной зачистки киевским режимом следов военно-биологической программы, реализуемой Киевом при поддержке Минобороны США. В распоряжении российского Минобороны оказались документы, которые подтверждают, что на территории Украины сформировалась сеть из, по крайней мере, 30 биологических лабораторий, в которых проводятся крайне опасные биологические эксперименты, нацеленные на усиление патогенных свойств чумы, сибирской язвы, толеремии, холеры и других смертельных болезней с использованием синтетической биологии. Эта работа ведется при финансировании и непосредственном кураторстве Управления Министерства обороны США по снижению военной угрозы, в том числе в интересах Национального центра медицинской разведки
and other lethal diseases using synthetic biology. This work is being done and funded and supervised by the Defense Threat Reduction Agency of the United States, including in the interest of the National Center for Medical Intelligence of the United States Ministry of Defense. The key role in implementing this program was placed by the Central Reference Laboratory with the Biosafety Level 3, using for its the basis of the Ukrainian Scientific Anti-Plague Institute named after Mechnikov and located in Odessa. An active participant here was also conducted by research centers in other cities of Ukraine, in Kiev, in Lvov, in Kharkov, in Dnepr, in Kherson, in Ternopil, in Uzhgorod, and Vinnytsia. The results of this work were being sent to military biological centers in the United States, including into the U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases, into the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research, into the Naval Medical Research of U.S. Navy, and into the U.S. Army Biological Warfare Laboratories in Fort Detrick, which used to be being key facilities of the American program to develop biological weapons. All of these materials are available on the website of our Ministry of Defense, and our Ministry of Defense is describing them in the course of their daily briefings. Let me just dwell on the more salient examples. Our military became aware of the details of the project UP4, which was being conducted in laboratories of Kiev, Kharkov, and Odessa. The goal is to study the possibility of spreading particularly dangerous infections using migratory birds. And this includes the highly pathogenic influenza H5N1, whose lethality for people reaches 50%, as well as the Newcastle disease. Yeah, there was another project where the vector of the potential agents of biological weapon, bats, were considered. Amongst priority areas for study, they include the bacterial and viral pathogens that could spread from bats to people, such as plague, leptospirosis, and as well as filoviruses and coronaviruses. As can see from the project documents, the United States actively funded the biological projects in Ukraine. Experiments were being conducted to study the spread of dangerous diseases using ectoparasites such as lice and fleas. Even non-specialists understand that such experiments are one of the more reckless because they do not give you an opportunity to control how the situation is going to develop further. Similar studies using lice and fleas as agents were conducted in the 1940s by the infamous Squad 731 of the Japanese Army, whose members, by the way, found refuge in the United States and escaped justice. Ukraine has a unique geographical location. A whole number of migratory routes cross there for potential spreaders of disease, and many of them go through Russia and Eastern Europe. The research I just mentioned was conducted in the very heart of Eastern Europe and in immediate proximity of the Russian border. As the data we received shows us, the birds which were ringed and released as a result of bio-research in Kherson Zoo, they were caught in Ivanovo and Voronezh Oblast of the Russian Federation later. And the analysis of the materials shows that there was a transfer from biolaboratory in Kharkov abroad of about 140 containers with ectoparasites of bats. And we do not know what was the further fate of these dangerous materials and what a consequence is going to be of the fact that there was no international control there and they will simply dissolve quite probably over Europe. In any event, there is a very high risk that they will be stolen and used for terrorist purposes or that they will be sold on the black market. Using the pretext of curing for coronavirus, from Ukraine into the Walter Reed Institute in the United States, several thousand samples of blood serum of the people was taken, and most of them are of Slavic extraction. Everyone knows how careful people in the West are when it comes to transferring the biomaterials of Western nationals abroad. And there is reason for that, because in theory, bioagents can be created which can selectively target specific ethnic groups. At the same time, the activity of biological laboratories, who we notice have been accessed since 2014 and what is being implemented by the United States within the program of so-called reform of Ukrainian healthcare, led to a uncontrolled growth in Ukraine when it comes to particularly dangerous and economically important infections. There is a growing number of German measles cases, diphtheria and tuberculosis. The cases of measles went up by a factor of more than 100. World Health Organization declared Ukraine a country with a high risk of an outbreak of poliomyelitis. There is also evidence to show that in Kharkov, where one of such laboratories is located, in January 2016, 20 Ukrainian soldiers died from the swine flu and 200 more were hospitalized. By March of the same year, in Ukraine, 364 people already died from swine flu. The outbreak of African swine fever in Ukraine have become a regular occurrence. In 2019, there was an outbreak of a disease which symptomatically is very close to plague. At the time when the military biological studies in the United States were removed because of danger to the people, the Kiev authorities basically agreed to make their country into an experimental platform and using their citizens as guinea pigs. These experiments, with a potential risk for the entire country, is something that went on for years. And we can see in this yet another confirmation of an extraordinary cynicism of Kiev's mentors, who tell us all the time that they're very concerned by the fate of the Ukrainian people. If we are to believe what is being said by Reuters, and the WHO recommended that Ukraine should eliminate the particularly dangerous pathogens they have to make sure that they avoid leaks. Otherwise, this could lead to the spread of diseases amongst the population. And we don't know whether Kiev implemented that recommendation. The Ministry of Defense of ours has materials stating that all of the serious studies of high level of danger in biological laboratories in Ukraine were conducted under the leadership of specialists of the United States who had diplomatic immunity. Currently, according to our Ministry of Defense, the Kiev regime, according to the request of their Western mentors, are trying to clean it all up to make sure that the Russian side does not find direct evidence that the United States and Ukraine are violating Article 1 of Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention. Their biological programs are being urgently closed up, and the Ministry of Health of Ukraine set us up the goal to, as of the 24th of February, fully destroy the bioagents in laboratories. The analysis of instructions in laboratories tells us that the order of liquidations is aimed at their irretrievable elimination. Our analysis shows that in Lviv alone, 233 containers with leptospirosis agents were destroyed, 30 with tularemia, 10 with brucellosis, 5 with plague. Overall, 320 containers. The nomenclature and the excessive number of biopathogens leads us to believe that these work were conducted within the framework of a military biological program. I would like to address my colleagues from Europe separately. Right next to the European Union, you've had an experimental platform for extremely dangerous biological trials. And we call upon you to think about a very real biological danger to the people in European countries, which can result from an uncontrolled spread of bioagents from Ukraine, which, as we have seen with COVID-19, is impossible to stop. And if there is such a scenario, then all Europe will be covered by it. Representatives of the United States provide confusing information about the involvement of the United States in this activity. Victoria Nuland, Assistant Secretary of State, basically confirmed the fact that there were dangerous studies being conducted in Ukrainian laboratories in Congress in 8th of March. There was a direct question put by Senator Marco Rubio, and she replied and said that in Ukraine there are research structures which should not end up in the hands of the Russian armed forces. End of quote. At the same time, the State Department continue insisting that on the territory of Ukraine, there are no laboratories under the control of the United States. We would like to, in this regard, put a question to the American delegation. How can this tally with the agreement of 2005 between your Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Health of Ukraine about cooperation in the area of development technologies and pathogens which could be used so as to develop bioweapons? This document exists in the internet, and in line with Article 3 of this agreement, the Ministry of Defense of the United States can extend assistance to the Ministry of Health of Ukraine in the area of joint biological research, determining threats from biological agents and working out a response to them as relates to, and I quote, to the dangerous pathogens deployed on objects on the territory of Ukraine. And I would like to underscore here that biological threats, because of its very nature, knows no borders. There is no region in the world today who can feel safe. The United States are overseeing several hundreds laboratories in about 30 countries in the Middle East, in Africa, Southeast Asia, and also on the perimeter of the former USSR. Placing it under international verification is something that Washington categorically refusing to do. They've blocked, since 2001, a legally binding protocol under the Biological and Toxic Weapons Convention about creating an effective verification mechanism to ensure compliance. And this can but lead us to the thought that the United States have something to hide. I call upon colleagues in these regions to think about what kind of an activity Washington is conducting on their territory, what the consequences for your people will be. I can foresee what the reaction will be from our Western colleagues, who I'm sure are going to be saying now that all of this information is fake and Russian propaganda. But this is self-delusion, and I do not think this will be helpful to the European people in case there are outbreaks in Ukraine or neighboring states with further spread and bringing in their wake dangerous diseases. The risk of this is very real, given the interest that the radical nationalist groups in Ukraine are showing towards the work with dangerous pathogens conducted together with the Ministry of Defense of the United States. We also know that in the case of any such incident, Pentagon told their Ukrainian colleagues to immediately accuse the armed forces of the Russian Federation of this, say that they are striking against scientific and medical institutions, and or link these incidents with the Russian diversionary groups. The Ministry of Defense of Russia continues analyzing the biological situation in Ukraine and the materials we keep receiving. What we told you today is a very small portion of the information that we have. Detailed information is something that we will disseminate in the very near future. As an official document of Security Council, you will be able to study it. We think it is our duty to keep the Security Council informed of the situation when it comes to the military biological activity by the United States in Ukraine. It creates real risk for international peace and security, and we intend to revert to the discussion of this topic in the very near future. We do not exclude the possibility of invoking the mechanism of Articles 5 and 6 of the Biological and Toxic Weapons Convention. At present, however, we expect to hear responses from the American side to the questions that we put. I thank you, Madam President.
أشكر ممثل الاتحاد الروسي على بيانه.
I would like to thank the representative of the Russian Federation, and I give the floor to the representative of Albania.
Thank you, Madam President. Let me thank USG Di Carlo and USG Nakamisutu for their information. I would like to make the following points. First, we meet at the request of Russia following allegations on a possible program of development of biological weapons in Ukraine. We listened to their statement very carefully. Madam President, any issue regarding weapons of mass destruction should never be taken lightly. As we just heard from the USG, the United Nations is not aware of any of the alleged program inconsistent with international treaty obligations, including on chemical or biological weapons. We heard about health facilities in Ukraine. We have heard repeatedly also a firm rebuttal at the highest levels from both the US and Ukraine. Therefore, Russia's allegations are, in our opinion, part of the information warfare, false, unsubstantiated, part of the usual propaganda and the disinformation coming from Russia, conspiracy theories not worth our time. The Council should not be served with fantasies or story-eyed stories, but with proof, independently verified and corroborated. This is not the case. However regrettable all this is, it is hardly surprising since everything, absolutely everything we have been hearing from Russia regarding Ukraine has been false, fabricated, or distorted. These are all in the public space and do not deserve mentioning, but the real palme d'or goes to the Russian declaration just 2 days ago, according to which Russia has not attacked Ukraine. Well, as we saw last week, the UN General Assembly has a different account. In every other situation, everyone would have thought that this is a joke, except for the fact that this joke is destroying a country, is killing civilians, and is responsible for more than 2.5 million refugees and counting. That translates to 7,000 people per hour. Reportedly, this is also responsible for the death of several thousand Russian soldiers, but this is an issue for Russia and its people. All the more reasons for the immediate ceasefire and leave place to negotiations. Second, Madam President, Russia has a long and well-documented track record of using chemical weapons, including in attempted assassinations and in poisoning its own citizens, like the jailed opposition leader Alexei Navalny or the Skripals. Bellingcat reporting has been brilliantly able to make a direct and irrefutable link of the attempted deadly poisoning with GRU high officials. We should therefore be very worried that in spreading such disinformation, a crescendo of allegations about weapons of mass destruction could serve as yet another pretext for Russia to prepare the ground and use chemical or biological weapons during its ongoing invasion of Ukraine while accusing others. After all, Russia has accused Ukraine of genocide in Donbass, which is ridiculous. It has also accused Kiev of seeking to produce nuclear weapons, which is outrageous. It has accused Ukraine of bombarding its own cities, which is preposterous. As we have heard many times, including yesterday, Russia has and continues to support the regime of Bashar al-Assad in Syria, which has used chemical weapons against the civilian population. Dear colleagues, what should retain our attention and deserves our time is the escalating situation that is wrecking 2 countries, threatening a whole continent, and disrupting the entire world. 15 days into this brutal invasion and the growing armed might of Russia, with the open complicity of Belarus, has stalled before the steel-clad and indisputable right of a nation to defend its land. Russia's goals are as abhorrent as the means it is using to achieve them. We are horrified by the catastrophic situation in Mariupol and other besieged cities where civilians are starved, by the use of cluster ammunition and in urban areas, as we heard during the briefing, by the redoubling of blind shelling and bombardments, by more than 26 assaults on various health-related facilities or including ambulances, as confirmed by the WHO and confirmed during this meeting, by outrageous and immoral acts which constitute war crimes. These are facts. Nothing seems to be going as planned in Ukraine. The unprovoked, unjustified, and premeditated act of aggression by Russia, again with the complicity of Belarus, lacks any legal or moral ground. The very ones that in turn empower Ukrainians to fight heroically, be ready to die for the ideals they believe in, for the right to choose who they want to be shapers of their own destiny. In this respect, we welcome the conclusions of the European Council, which, among others, welcomed the will of Ukraine to join the European Union. We are warm-hearted by the Ukrainian resistance, incomprehensible maybe to the invader, and which should be seen as an inspiration and a reminder that freedom always prevails over tyranny. Let's not forget, colleagues, if Russia makes its way into Ukraine, it will not stop there. It will want more. And as history reminds us, aggression works like a drug. This is why David must and will prevail. I thank you.
أشكر ممثل ألبانيا على بيانه وأعطي الكلمة لممثلة الولايات المتحدة.
Thank Albania. The United States, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you to our briefers for your remarks this morning. Russia asked the Security Council for today's meeting for the sole purpose of lying and spreading disinformation, and that is exactly what you have heard from the Russian PR this morning. You also heard from Ms. Nakamitsu that the UN is not aware of any biological or chemical weapons programs in Ukraine. Last month, Secretary Blinken laid out with tragic accuracy what Russia was about to do. He specifically warned that Russia would manufacture a pretext for attack and even cautioned that Russia would fabricate allegations about chemical or biological weapons to justify its own violent attacks against the Ukrainian people. Today, the world is watching Russia do exactly what we warned it would. Russia is attempting to use the Security Council to legitimize disinformation and deceive people to justify President Putin's war of choice against the Ukrainian people. And China, too, has been spreading disinformation in support of Russia's outrageous claims. I will say this once. Ukraine does not have a biological weapons program. There are no Ukrainian biological weapons laboratories supported by the United States, not near Russia's border or anywhere. So here are the facts. Ukraine owns and operates its own public health laboratory infrastructure. These facilities make it possible to detect and diagnose diseases like COVID-19, which benefit us all. The United States has assisted Ukraine to do this safely and securely. This is work that has been done proudly, clearly, and out in the open. This work has everything to do with protecting the health of people. It has absolutely nothing to do with biological weapons. In fact, it is Russia that has long maintained a biological weapon program in violation of international law. It is Russia that has a well-documented history of using chemical weapons. It is Russia who is the aggressor here. It was Russian operatives who poisoned Alexei Navalny and Sergei and Yulia Skripal with nerve agents. It is Russia that continues to support the Assad regime in Syria and shield it from accountability when the UN and the OPCW have confirmed that Assad has repeatedly used chemical weapons over the past several years. And we're deeply concerned that Russia's calling for this meeting is a potential false flag effort in action. Exactly the kind we have been warning about, including from Secretary Blinken here in the Security Council last month. Russia has a track record of falsely accusing other countries of the very violations that Russia itself is perpetrating. And given that, and consistent with our previous statements, we have serious concerns that Russia may be planning to use chemical or biological agents against the Ukrainian people. The intent behind these lies seem clear, and it is deeply troubling. We believe Russia could use chemical or biological agents for assassinations as part of a staged or false flag incident or to support tactical military operations. From the beginning, our strategy to counter Russia's tactics has been to share what we know with the world transparently. And candidly, we have been right more than we'd like to. We're not going to let Russia get away with lying to the world or staining the integrity of the Security Council by using this forum as a venue for legitimizing Putin's violence. Russia has attacked homes, schools, orphanages, and hospitals. Russia has attacked civilian infrastructure, including water and sanitation facilities. Their forces are laying Ukrainian cities under siege. Hundreds of thousands of civilians now don't have access to electricity for heat or drinking water to stay alive. Russia is the aggressor here. And despite Russia's best efforts, the media and everyday Ukrainians are documenting this truth on the ground. Russia can't paint over the front page of the New York Times, which on Monday featured the bodies of a Ukrainian mother and her 2 children, who died while trying to cross a bridge outside Kyiv in their attempt to flee to safety. Russia cannot cover up the work of AP News reporters who captured a doctor attempting to resuscitate an 18-month-old Kirill who died from Russian shelling in Mariupol. Russia cannot suppress the social media posts confirmed and amplified by CBS News that told the story of the 11-year-old Ukrainian boy who fled to Slovakia by himself with only a passport, a plastic bag, and a phone number scrawled on his hands. Russia cannot silence the Al Jazeera report of Russian soldiers terrorizing Ukrainian cities. And Ukrainian journalists are risking their lives every day to deliver to the world the latest on-the-ground facts, such as Novo Vremye reporting on the reckless behavior of Russian forces toward Ukraine's nuclear facilities. Russia is failing in its quest to create an alternative reality. In fact, not even Russian diplomats can keep their propaganda straight. Just yesterday, the Kremlin spokesman said he didn't have clear information about the Russian forces who fired on a maternity hospital. Then the foreign minister himself denied Russia attacked Ukraine at all, right before admitting that Russia deliberately targeted this maternity hospital in Mariupol. Their fabrications didn't matter because the world had already seen the searing images broadcast on CNN of bloodied pregnant women being evacuated from the scene of Russia's attack on the hospital. Even Russia's own citizens are tiring of such lies. Russian athletes are writing "No war" on their shoes and on TV cameras. Russian citizens are marching in the streets and protesting Putin's war of choice. And even Russian state TV pundits, Putin's own propaganda arm, have called for Putin to stop the military action. This is why we didn't object to holding today's meeting. Today's meeting has confirmed our predictions, revealed Russia's objectives to the world, and exposed Russia's lies for what they are, a malicious effort to cover for the atrocities being committed by Russia as part of their illegal and unprovoked attack on Ukraine. It is a page directly out of the Russian playbook, and it will not convince us one bit. The world is watching. Photographic and video evidence is mounting, and you will be held to account for your actions. We will not let atrocities slide. Unlike the Russian government, whose first instinct is to silence, we are confident that truth and transparency will prevail. We call on President Putin to end this unprovoked, unconscionable war against the Ukrainian people. Thank you.
أشكر ممثلة الولايات المتحدة على بيانها.
I thank the representative of the United States, and I now give the floor to the representative of France. Mr. President, I thank Mesdames DiCarlo and Nakamitsu for their briefings. I wish to denounce in the strongest of terms the unfounded allegations of Russia. Russia would have us believe that chemical attacks are being prepared in Ukraine. Russia would also have us believe that there are bioweapon research laboratories. Let us be serious. No one is fooled by Russia's lies. They are part of a cynical disinformation strategy and a smoke screen which Russia has used to make into a veritable weapon of war.
That UN Security Council meeting there continues. Of course, so we are monitoring this. So we still are waiting to hear from the Ukraine as well as, of course, a number of other countries. And when you look at what has been said, I mean, just a short while ago, you heard from Linda Thomas-Greenfield, who is the UN ambassador, the US ambassador rather, to the UN, talking about how Russia, calling this meeting, is looking to use and legitimize disinformation, saying that they believe that Russia, in fact, accusing other countries of having biological warfare, is actually the one that is doing that, and saying that Russia is guilty of the many crimes that it accuses a lot of countries of. And you listen to the Undersecretary General of the Department of Political and Peace Building of Africa, Rosemary DiCarlo, also talking about the millions of people that continue to be displaced and urgent assistance is needed, 2.5 million refugees, and saying that there's a lot of meetings that are being held right now, and they do encourage the dialogue, but they do not encourage the conflict that they're seeing. So we are going to continue monitoring this. And Russia even saying that the US funded the biological projects in the Ukraine. You listened to Ambassador Thomas Greenfield talking about how that is not true. We'll continue to watch this session, and of course Sherwin Bryce Peace is also monitoring developments there.